Okay guys, so welcome to the sky. So, the plan of this lesson, we're obviously just going to recap what we've just covered in respect to the board briefing. What we're going to do is we're going to set up tracking towards a VOR. Now, where are we? We are just to the east of Colchester, so we're in Essex, between Stansted and Southend, and we've got Clacton VOR or behind us on a sort of a easterly direction from here. So what we need to do is we need to look on our chart and select a VOR. So we've got Clacton VOR, I've selected that, and the frequency for Clacton is 114. So we're going to select, this is part of our SID, select, do it on the secondary. So we're going to copy it down here just so we get a realistic instrument of what you're going to really see in a Cessna and so on. Just going to make a one right-hand turn whilst we're just setting this up. And that will do. Okay, so 11455. So we set that to the active here. So we set it, we need to identify it. I choose nav2 actually. So the Morse code that we're listening to is the correct code. So we've selected the VOR. We've now tuned it and identified it with the Morse code. So now I'm going to turn the Morse code off. And now we need to display it. Now we're using this instrument here. You can see at the moment we've got the 2 flag that we're talking about. And when I turn it around, the line or the needle moves and it now becomes a from flag. So, in this example I want to go to the VOR on a radial of 090, for example. So let's say, again this is just demonstration purposes, this is not for what you're going to be tested on. Let's say I need a 2 flag, which I've now got, and I want 090 radial. That's actually worked out nicely to be what we're effectively on. Now, we are quite a way away from the VOR itself, so as we track away from that radial line, the needle's going to gradually move out, as you can see here. Hopefully you can see the needle gradually moving to the right because the radial line is over here somewhere or right behind us. So, to get onto that, I'd need to turn to 090, but of course that's now just going to parallel the track, let's say no wind. So there's no wind, we're just going to parallel that radial line. So now we need to intercept. So I'm going to come around just to a heading of about 130 degrees. That's quite extreme, but it will just speed the process up for the process of learning in this video. So we're turning. Clacton VOR is over here somewhere and it's drawing an imaginary or invisible line on a 090 radial coming to the right of us. So, as we now track towards this, if you want to visualize this again, this is the line here. And you can see it also on the CDI if you want to kind of have an aircraft perspective compared to the radial line. So this is the invisible line where the arrowhead is, and this line is moving in. So focusing on this OBS, the needle's moving in. Once the needle is in the perfect middle, we'll turn onto our easterly heading. There we are. So let's turn onto our easterly heading. I'm saying 090 degrees just for best case. I'm going to go slightly through that. Maybe there's a wind behind it, behind us. Maybe there's a wind just pushing us through that. So we could correct left if we want. But as you see here, we're now tracking this radio towards VOR. Again, let's say we're not correcting for any wind and there's a really strong wind from our left hand side. So let's say we're just flying an easterly heading but not correcting for any wind. Over time, this needle's going to drift in which direction? Now I'm going to let you kind of answer that. What direction do you think the needle will move? If we've got a wind coming from the left hand side of the aircraft pushing us right, what way would the needle move? So if you said the needle's going to move left, you would be correct. The reason being, we're tracking a 090 radial. However, this is the ground track that the wind's now making us do, if you think of it that way. So the line's going to move left because we're moving or being blown to the right of the line, or the needle. So now you can see the needle's to our right. So to correct, all I need to do is roll back onto east and think, right, east is the head of the track that we want to be on. We've been blown off to the right, so we need to correct further left by somewhat. So firstly, let's recenter the needle. So we're now on an easterly heading, as you can see. So we need to recenter the needle. We need to come left of 090, because that's where the needle is. So let's just come left. Let's say 070 degrees. And what you'll see here is the needle will nicely come back towards us, or towards centre, but now you'll notice the needle's actually moving quite quickly with smaller heading changes, and that's because we're getting closer to the VOR. So now we can kind of tick on to another part. So back onto that 090 track. I'm adjusting the heading, not the CDI here. So there we are. Now our OBS has the line in the middle, thereabouts, but I'm not correcting for wind. So that is how we track to a VOR. So I'm going to keep the video running here, as we are going to pass over the VOR very, very shortly. So what you're going to see, I'm just going to demonstrate this, is as we move, the needle becomes more and more sensitive. So that there is a 20-degree heading change. What are we seeing on the instrument? You're seeing that needle coming in quite quickly. And if we stayed on this, watch how quickly it's going to move off to our left-hand side. Again, quite quickly compared to earlier on when we started this tracking. Now, if I move back towards the track, and just correcting towards the needle, but I'm only going 5 degrees left of our track that we're wanting, we're going to see the needle come back in towards the central. So, hopefully guys, I haven't confused you too much at the moment. But effectively, we're on that easterly track, and now we're just flying. If you draw a line from a point directly west, we're tracking from the west towards the VOR. Let me just roll back onto that heading. You can see it getting really sensitive now, that needle. So we're west of the VOR, we're tracking eastbound towards it, and effectively all we've done on our way to the VOR at the moment is just zigzag along an imaginary or invisible line in the air. If you look at the VOR, sorry, the GNS 530 here, you can see we've got the VOR symbol here. So you can see we're getting closer to it. We've got a distance of 3.8 miles. The needle's becoming very sensitive, so I'm coming very slightly right. And as the closer you get to the VOR, if you remember from the board brief, the less of a hedging change you need. Because if you change 40 degrees to the right, you're going to catch up with this needle so quickly that you're going to overshoot, and you actually just oscillate over the line, or the radial line. So very small headings to track towards, or to correct onto your line that you want, or the radial you want. I keep saying line because I'm trying to reference this needle here. So as we're getting closer, we're at 2.2 miles. This is what we get called the cone of confusion. So the VOR is just there. So watch the OBS as we get closer and closer to it. And I'm just going to turn back towards our easterly track because now we're perfectly on the line. Now, what you might see, and again, I don't know if the sim replicates this very well, but you might see this needle moving left and right. You might see the 2 flag. There we are. See how sensitive it is? So now we're coming into that cone of confusion. There's no point chasing it because we're only 0.9 miles away from the VOR. So just stay on the track. The needle's going out to the right because it's going right beneath us, the VOR. Now, you might see the 2 flag go to nothing, or to a from flag. I don't know how well it's got it modelled or replicated in the sim. But we're going to maintain our 090 track. There we are. So now we've got FR for from, and it says we're to the right of, we're to the left of the radial. There's the VOR just down there. So see how close we actually passed a beam in. very within less than a mile easily, maybe even less than half a mile there. So as we track further and further away from the VOR, this line is probably going to come back towards the middle because of the degrees, or the miles away from the VOR, the degrees between each radial line actually differs. Maybe it's not. So now we're tracking away, we're probably out of that cone of confusion, so we can now track back towards our VOR radial. But now you can see we're on an easterly radial from the VOR. So now we're to the east of the VOR. If I wanted to set a westerly track to the VOR, I would just change this around 270 degrees with a 2 flag. Hope that makes sense. But you can see now, very small heading change, no more than 10 degrees, is gradually bringing the radial needle, or the radial, back towards us. So with, on this imaginary line here, we're now actually tracking back towards our intended radial. So that's how you track to a VOR, and this is how you track from a VOR. Okay guys, so now we're just repositioning ourselves. We're gonna, we've detuned Clacton VOR. So the Dover VOR, I'm using select identify display once again. So select, I'm selecting Dover, the frequency 114, decimal 95. And you would only select this on 1 if you have 1, but I'm just selecting it on 2 to try and make the Morse a bit louder, also to get it to display on 2 different types of OBS or CDI. So we've selected it and it's in the boxes. Have a listen, you can listen to the Morse code here, try and follow along as well. There we are. So the Morse code is identified correctly, that is the Dover VOR, so now we need to display it. We're going to track away from the VOR, so where's Dover to us? Dover, of course, is down here to the south, directly south, so we're almost due north of Dover VOR. You can see we're 44.7 miles away, and we're tracking away, so the number's increasing. So, I want to track a radial from the VOR. I'm not too fussed on which one, because I'm just going to demonstrate what you'll have to be doing on the test. But we want a from flag, because we're tracking away from the VOR, and we want a radial line to be centered. So, I'm looking, even though you could center it here, you're going towards it now, but we're going from. So we need to continue turning this around until we get the from flag displayed. There we are, from, and continue turning it until we get the needle centered. So if you look here, this shows a radial, not very clear actually, this shows a radial of 358, 359. So if we stay on this heading of 030 degrees, what do you think will happen? If you said that the needle will move to the left, you would be correct. Now, because we're 47 miles away from it, the needle's moving very slowly, even though we're 30 degrees tracking through or towards the northeast. So we need to recenter our CDI. Let's say there. And what we need to do is we're on the 360 radial, so to track that and keep this in the middle, we need to fly a track of 360 degrees. So just to confirm, that's pretty much north. So we'll turn heading of 360 degrees, and again, I'll demonstrate this for any one of you that have this instrument here, the CDI. We do exactly the same. We're looking for a from flag, which you've got here, FR, and we're setting the line to be in the middle, exactly the same, no difference. So, you can see the radial we're on is the 360 degree radial from Dover, which is, like I said, down behind us. So now we're tracking away from it northbound on this track. If there's no wind, we can leave it like this and we'll follow this radial forever until we lose line of sight with the VOR, and then of course we'll lose signal. However, if there's a wind, of course we're going to get blown off this radial. So again, if we've now got a wind coming from the right, guys, what way would this needle move? So the wind's blowing us coming from the right and it's pushing us to the left. So where this aircraft is on the GNS 530, we're going to the left because our drift is blowing us this way because we're not correcting for wind. So in that case, what would the needle do? Would it go left? Would it go right? If you said right, you would be correct. The reason being, if you look at it representative on this CDI here, the wind coming from east, it's blowing right to the left. So if we stay on this track, our ground track is going to be something like this. So as the aircraft moves left, that means this line's going to say, hey, you're going left. So it's going to display that to us by showing a turn or the line going off to the right. So for us to maintain that, we'd have to fly a heading to the right of 360 degrees. By how much? It all depends on what the actual wind speed is and what your drift is. So of course, you'd have this kind of worked out. Or you can eyeball it as well. I mean, today it looks like it's a calm wind or a north-south wind because we're not getting blown off the radial. But if there was a wind coming from the right, you could always just trial and error, put the heading, say 005. Try that for a while. Bearing in mind, we are now 54 miles almost from Dover. So, a 5-degree heading change is actually, could be a matter of a good few miles on the ground because we're so far out from the VOR.